I'm so happy today to have Noah Ernst here. Thanks for coming, Noah.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're a District 1 candidate, and I was going to say I first met and heard from you at Von Ebert Brewing. This was probably a month ago now, or a couple months ago.
Yeah, for a candidate forum.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember meeting you there.
And I was just like, I had heard you were running. I mean, I just heard your name. I didn't know much about you, but I heard from your little speech, I was just so impressed.
Oh, thank you.
And like, just I think idea wise, I align with you a lot just
Okay.
as a
Yeah.
voter, and also I just think you're a great speaker. So
Oh, well, thank you very much.
yeah,
Some of that is from obviously practicing law and going to court and having to, sound like you know what you're talking about
yeah,
in front of judges and stuff. And then part of it is just trying to, shove that fear down a little bit and just going for it and hopefully being prepared enough that you know what you're going to say.
yeah, yeah. Because I was gonna say I actually heard. I mean, maybe this was a week ago. It was really recently. I didn't know you had a lawyer or like a legal background.
Okay.
I knew the radio cab thing. And I think
Right.
that's cool too. But to me, that's just such a cool combination, and it makes you one of the more interesting candidates to me. Is just like it's this cool background of of like kind of, I guess, high education, and then also like you're working at a cool place like Radio Cab that has a long history in
Right.
Portland and a lot
Well,
of workers there. And
right.
yeah,
I would say it's I have a diverse background, I think is a nice way of saying it. And I like to tell people, I pulled green chain while I was going to college. So I was at a lumber mill, and then, I've worked as a short order cook. I've run a small business. I've practiced law, and I've been a cab driver. And, there's things in between there. And people, I think, especially before Uber and Lyft, I think failed to understand that cab driving really is a profession that was done by professionals. And I've had people ask me because it seems like a come down to them going from practicing law to being a cab driver. And I said, it's not, because one, I never looked down on cab drivers beforehand, but it's going from working as a professional in a profession with a group of professionals to moving to another type of profession where you're a professional and you work with other professionals. And that's really how I think about it.
yeah. What's interesting because yeah, I one of my questions on here was gonna. I just wrote down Radio Cab pre-lift because
Yeah.
I know it's such a shift in there, but it is like I totally agree with what you're saying. Like you almost embody this like blue collar, white collar mix that's just representative of probably a lot of Portland, I feel like. I don't know.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. I mean, in my life, I've gone through phases, where you think I want to be more a blue collar type person, and I'm going to wear Carhartt, and then later, like, but um, I just try to any job I've been in. I just try to work as well as I can with the people who are there,
Mm.
right? And you just have to respect what people do, and I think that that's what I carry through all of this is that my dad comes from the plywood industry, and my mom worked at colleges, in different capacities. And when she passed away, she was a professor. And, there is that dichotomy in my background, right? But at the same time, there's always, people who work hard and do good work are not, but you're not better or worse
Right,
than
right.
anybody else because of what you do. And really, people in all professions are often intelligent, hardworking, and you can learn so much from everybody.
Yeah, that kind of good work is applicable to everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah, I was gonna, yeah, say just tell people more about yourself, but I was gonna say also my this is just my own soapbox here of District One.
Hmm.
I've been saying a lot on this show, like I just identify a lot more with District One. I'm on the edge of kind of District Three out
Right.
here, but what I talk about a lot is we have a lot of the same livability issues that District One seems to have.
Right.
And what I was gonna my little soapbox was like my dream team in District One is Terrence Hayes, Loretta Smith, and you.
Okay. Well, I
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah, but I don't know. I was just gonna say, yeah, tell people a little bit about yourself. I know you just told kind of some of your background, but also about some of the issues in District One.
Okay. Well, just a little bit I was born in Roseburg and grew up in small towns all up and down Western Oregon, Western Washington. My father, like I said, was in the plywood industry. And as you know, in the 70s and 80s, that was on the downward
Hmm.
spiral.
Hmm.
And a mill would close and we would move. I went to high school up by in Snohomish, Washington, which is up by Everett, just north of Seattle. I went to Central Washington University and got degrees in fine art and philosophy. So I wasn't qualified to do anything. But I tell people that I went into art because I loved it, and I went into philosophy for the money. Um, so then from there, my dad and I started a business on the Tide Flats in Tacoma. It was a little woodworking, industrial woodworking business, and we ended up moving it to Eugene. And so we did that for, I think, a year and a half or so in Eugene, and I had gotten to the point where I could no longer work with my dad. And we have a great relationship now, and I love him, but we were not good business partners
Yeah.
slash working together. And some families are and some families
And
aren't,
I know
right?
for like friends that can be the case too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. And so I applied for law school and went to the University of Oregon School of Law and graduated and passed the bar in 2000.
Okay.
Practiced for a year in Eugene and then decided it was time to move, and Portland was the city I wanted to be in. So moved to Portland and practiced law here for up until 2009. So, and the
Okay.
last firm I worked at was a firm that represented contractors and developers, and I was on their civil litigation team. And obviously, in 2008, everybody will remember that sort of the bottom fell out of construction and a lot of other things. And so, if there's no construction, there's no contract work on the front end, and there's no litigation work on the back end. So, in 2009, I was let go. And that was a time that the American Bar Association called the worst legal market since the Great Depression.
Oh, wow.
And so I was unemployed for about a year, and a friend worked at Radio Cab and said, "Hey, why don't you come and drive a cab until you get a real job?" And I went and started driving. And I drove nights for 3 years because, I mean, they were joking, but it really is a real job.
I know. I was
And
gonna say it
especially,
is a job.
especially then, and before Uber and Lyft, when Radio Cab really owned the night business, and it was just a great, fun. You could make money. It was a good job, and so I did that for 3 years, and then a superintendent position opened up, and I applied for that and became a superintendent at Radio Cab. And since I've always maintained my active law license, I'm able to be in-house counsel for Radio Cab as well,
Oh,
and
nice.
do some of their contract work and sort of consult with and manage outside counsel and different things like that. So, I've been able to keep my foot in sort of both of those worlds a little bit, and yeah, it's just been a great experience and a great transition and into a whole different type of career.
Yeah. And I'd imagine they're still down in Northwest
Yeah, they're in
downtown.
they're in Northwest in the old building they've had since I think the 50s,
Mhm.
which used to be a building for horse trolleys.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
When they had the
way back when.
patrol or whatever.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Way
Wow.
back. It's been there for 100 and some years, that building. So
Did they still? This is a random question, but I remember I think years ago, didn't they have a gas station in there that you could?
they still have a gas
Okay.
station inside, and I think we're not sure if it's the only indoor gas station in the United States, but we know it's the only indoor gas station in Oregon.
Yeah.
And before you worry, they do air testing, and the
I'm not worried about
the openings of the building are sufficiently sized that
Yeah.
the air inside and outside tests equally clean. But yeah, it's a great thing, and kind of a fun.
It's unique. Yeah.
Yeah. And they did pass the law recently that allows
Self.
gas stations to allow you to pump your own gas if you opt in. And we decided not to because you make a mistake in an indoor
Yeah.
gas station, that
a little more-
wooden building and all that wooden and
Yeah.
brick building, things can go a lot more wrong. So we decided and we only have 2 rows of pumps anyway.
Okay.
So we weren't going to save any money on labor by letting you pump your own
Yeah.
gas. But yeah, it's a really amazing place.
It
And
is cool.
we love having people stop by sometimes the sons and daughters of old cab drivers stop by, just to say hi. And
Yeah.
their dad drove here in the 60s. And some people stop by just to see the building and ask about that. So yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah, it's cool, and they got, of course, the iconic cars. And
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. And so yeah, and what I've heard kind of from your speeches a few times, what inspired you to run for office and everything. Would you say those are unique? The issues you talk about are unique to your district? Because like I was just saying a few minutes ago, I feel like they're in my district and they're kind of
I
citywide.
think that there are issues that are unique to District 1, like the lack of investment over time I mean, you see some of it towards the edge of District 1, but the farther out you go,
It's
right?
just
That
neglect.
it's just neglect.
Yeah.
And when I moved to Portland in 2002, and I my first place was on 67th, the joke was if you were past 39th, you're not in Portland, right?
Right,
And then
right.
it
Yeah.
became if you're not
82nd.
or 57th and then 82nd and now 205, right? Oh, you're in Gresham or you're East County or you're
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's half joking when people say it, but also it really has felt like that joke has been the mentality of a lot of city leadership, which is we recognize kind of that it's Portland, but it's always that second thought. It always has been that second thought. And that's what's exciting about this change of government is that we're going to have people on the city council that are going to make sure that we're not a second thought anymore, that we are part of every conversation. And I think that's an amazing thing for East Portland, whoever is elected.
Yeah, that might be the best part of having these new districts, in my
Right.
opinion, is yeah, because ever since I've lived here almost 20 years, and yeah, it has been neglected for this whole time. And I've heard from a lot of people out there about the annexation and
Right.
all that stuff. And
Well, and I still, as of right now, right, you go out and you say, I'm running for city council, and they say, okay, where are you running? I say, I'm District 1, and they say, where's District 1? And I say, everything east of 205, because that's an easy shortcut. It does jog over to 82nd, I think, south of Powell.
a little bit, yeah.
But, and they say, oh, you're running for East County. And I'm like, no, I'm not running for East County. I'm running for East Portland.
Mhm.
And then they'll say, oh, you're running for Gresham. And I'm like, no, Gresham is a separate city, right? And so there is still that thought process with a lot of people. And I've said to people at many, many forums and that we are as much Portland as any other part of Portland is, and we are entitled to as much respect and as much investment and as much, consideration from the city as every other part of Portland. And part of that, the reason that hasn't happened is because we've never had good representation from here. And so when you elect most of your commissioners from Southwest or inner Southeast, they haven't been out here. They don't listen to the people out here. They don't talk to the people out here. And I'm so glad that that's going to have to change.
Yeah, yeah, because even the many years I've lived here, it always seemed like the commissioners in the previous form
Right.
were very focused on either downtown or inner, issues.
Right. Absolutely.
And
I think the great thing about breaking up the city into districts is that the reality has been that in order to win a city-wide election, you had to appeal to the broadest Portland demographic. And the broadest Portland demographic isn't necessarily the demographic of East Portland. Like, we're very different. We have a much more diverse population, both economically, racially, but also politically, right? And so if you're appealing to the broadest Portland voter, you may be totally not even speaking to the people who live in East Portland politically, because they're different enough from who you're trying to reach that their vote isn't going to help you. And that this system gives those people a voice.
yeah,
And says, no, you have to listen to us. You have to at least acknowledge us,
yeah, it totally does. Yeah, and like I said, I think one of the greatest things about the whole districting aspect is that East Portland just gets a voice. Yeah,
It's a
and the
voice.
three voices, I guess technically. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, I wrote this down too because this is just part of my rant as well. But I've been starting to call that stuff because I'm, like I said, right on the border, and I within District 3 try to stand up for what I see as the livability issues out
Right.
here. But a lot of people in my district, candidates, I've been starting to call them wealthy problems because they're just stuff that I do not
Right.
give a crap about, and
Right.
and we don't have sidewalks out here, and
Well, yeah, I notice
just-
you live on a street that they haven't paved
yeah,
yet.
it's unpaved, and yeah.
And then you see things like city council changing the definition of that used to be maybe an unmaintained,
They call
what
it
is it?
unimproved
Unimproved street
Yeah.
or whatever. And now they're going to call it an unmaintained street. And the difference is the city has an obligation to at least maintain unimproved streets. But no, they've decided they have no obligation to maintain an unmaintained street. I'm not saying this quite sounds confusing, but the point was they made a definitional change to shift the burden of maintaining your road that they never got around to paving from themselves to you because you live on it.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing, because who's affected by that? Right? Not the Southwest Hills, right? Who's affected by that is East Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. And I've heard all the time they'll say, well, those people don't want the street paved. And you're like,
I don't know
really?
who's saying that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like really, because again, you're absolutely right. I don't know who's saying that, but I've heard, when people say, why don't you come out and pave the streets in East Portland? That's what they'll say. And you're like, you just don't want to, you don't want to spend the money, and you don't think it's important fundamentally. And it is.
It's just kind of amazing, yeah, that people when they come here sometimes they can't believe it, and I'm just like, yeah, there's miles of these in
Yeah,
Southeast Portland, and I'm also like really close to a school, and
right,
we were talking about this the other day with another guest about I don't understand how it complies with ADA laws, and I guess
right.
they can just say, well, it's not our roads, that we can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, that's an open question. I was in Southeast 2 days ago, I think, handing out, knocking on doors, talking to people, handing out literature, and we're walking down a street that has to be 5 blocks off of Division, right? And it's intermediately paved. I mean, one of those streets that somebody paved at one point and is
it
filled with potholes,
kind
and it
of
doesn't have,
stops and
right.
yeah.
Well, and so you're walking along it and you realize that that's a elementary school,
Mm.
and yet most of the streets doesn't have sidewalks, including across the street from an elementary school. This is all kids walking, whatever. And the people that you're talking to are literally saying, how is it that we have a street in front of our elementary school where kids are walking to and from school every single day without sidewalks, and they're going to spend $100 million to ruin Division?
Mm.
Right. And it's those kinds of things that people in East Portland deal with all the time. Like, somebody decides there's this massive, wonderful project. We don't ask the people of East Portland if they want it, but we don't also come out and do the things that they actually do want.
Right.
Right. And again, that's why it's important. And that's why I want to advocate for the people of East Portland, because it really is time to stop doing things they don't want and start doing things that they do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you deal with this in District 1 too, but people I think might hear us talking about this and be like, well, what's the big deal? And for me, I've had literally years of people parking RVs out here. I've had
Right.
trash dumped in my front yard. It just attracts a lot of that kind
It
of
does,
stuff.
because
I found bullet casings outside out
right,
here, and
because it doesn't seem like, I don't know, you almost want to use the word civilization. That's too strong, but it just doesn't seem
it doesn't have those qualities
yeah,
that, yeah.
exactly. It just seems like that kind of thing might be acceptable.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're in a place that the streets are immaculate and it's got sidewalks and everything looks
Right.
pretty, they're going to look at that and say, this is not acceptable here. This neighborhood won't tolerate it.
Mhm.
Well, no neighborhood should have to tolerate it, right? And and that's, you were talking about the issues in the different districts and how they're different. I think most people would agree that the big issues for Portland are the big issues in almost every district, right? It's going to be public safety, it's going to be homelessness, it's going to be drug addiction and mental health, it's
Mhm.
going to be
Those are always the top
affordable
3.
housing, right?
Yeah.
And those are the issues, because that's what we're being affected by everywhere. But the reality of East Portland is that it's not homogenous, maybe in the same way that different other districts or different parts of Portland might be. And so you see the problems that other districts have with those things, versions of all the different problems in East Portland.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's not just, Southwest has a real problem in downtown, and so how do we deal with that? It's, yeah, we have it um, in part of our neighborhoods, but we also have it in the industrial areas, like maybe District 2, and then we also have it in commercial areas, like downtown has it, but we have those kinds of things out here. And so
District 1's aggregated
it
all of
just,
that.
yeah, aggregated all of it. And of course, we have the population with the lowest average income. We have more working class families. We have other issues that put people closer to,
Mhm.
experiencing homelessness if things go wrong, but also less able to absorb the kind of blows that come with having all those problems around them. And so and then to be chronically underinvested in
Right.
makes all of it worse,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you about this. I ask pretty much everyone about this, and I'm trying to kind of shift how I'm talking about it now
Hmm.
because I'm unhappy with how a lot of this has been reported on.
Okay.
But in my opinion, there's over 100 city candidates, right?
Right.
And there's been some reporting that's like saying that there's a split in these on how people feel police staffing is in Portland. And I don't think it's necessarily a split as much as a small group of that 100 candidates, like maybe 20 to 30%. But I've been asking everyone, obviously, like I think we need more police. What do you think we need to change
I
anything with police? And
well, so I absolutely believe we don't have enough police,
yeah,
and it's not a function of, you know, I don't know what the right word is. It's not just because I'm pro police. It's because the way you think about the number of police officers in a city is the number of officers per 10,000 of
mhm,
population. It's a very standard measure. And for a city our size, right, in order to provide the type of police presence and service that a city needs, the average in the United States is between 16 and 20 per 10,000 of
mhm,
population. All right. We're just above 12. All right.
right.
So
So
that
almost
is,
half of
yeah,
yeah,
2/3.
yeah.
And so that's just not good practice. It's not best practice. And we have seen the consequences of that in our police response, right? So we know that 911 hold times are way too long. And it's a fair question. I think a rational person would say, why, if you call 911, are you on hold at all? Given that that's probably an emergency.
Hmm.
Um, and our police response times are too long if they happen at all. And that's purely a function of not having enough officers in order to, they have to triage, right? And so I tell a story. My wife was home and a homeless couple stopped and let their dog do his business on our neighbor's lawn. He came out to object, and so they beat him up with a baseball bat. She's watching it. She's on the phone with 911. That's an assault, probably with a deadly weapon, a couple of felonies. Nobody was able ever to respond,
Wow.
right? And that's unacceptable, right? That's unacceptable. And so I think from that, just from a function standpoint, we need more officers. And we have 88 positions right now that we are unfilled, right?
Mhm.
Because recruiting is an issue and getting
Right.
officers is an issue. But even 88 wouldn't get us into even the bottom of the average range for a city our size. So we need to do funding. We to make sure we have resources available to hire officers so that your crisis can be responded to. And obviously there's a lot of talk about, alternate dispatching alternate resources, whether it's Portland Street Response or different things. And I the asterisk I put on that is that most people, when they call 911, want the police. That's why they're calling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I don't disagree that if you're calling because someone is having a mental health or an emergency, but there's no danger and there just need right, a different resource is appropriate. But most of the time, most people when they're calling are calling for a crime issue,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to have sufficient resources to handle that.
Yeah.
I think that obviously there was a lot of discussion in 2001 around what's around making sure that police are behaving responsibly and all that stuff. And we've had problems historically in Portland that needed to be addressed and are being addressed. And um, but we need at the same time to make sure we have the resources, make sure that they're supported so that we hire good officers who have good training, who do good work, and we're able to deal with the issues in our city because we've seen what happens when you
Mm-hmm.
understaff police forces. Right, we end
Yeah.
up to a large degree where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you point that out. And, and it's one of the reasons I just bring it up all the time is because it is just to me pure math. And if people
Right,
don't understand that ratio of officers per citizens, like
right,
that's like the starting point. But it is also just, I'm trying to really emphasize that because I hear from people all the time about that. They had some incident, either it took 2 hours or nobody showed up. And I'm
right,
trying to tell them, like you're saying, yeah, it's because we don't have somebody else. There's no one else to abate those
right. And
problems.
I
And
think that what's under sort of reported, right, is if you don't have enough resources, right, then you would expect, and the police do, they prioritize the more serious things, right? Makes perfect sense, right?
Classic triage. Yeah.
You want murderers to be caught, right? But the downside of that is that often the things that we think of or people describe as minor or petty crimes are the things that affect the livability of a city on a day to
Absolutely.
day to day basis,
Yeah. Especially businesses.
especially businesses.
Yeah.
And we've seen in East Portland, right, a lot of businesses close due to continuous shoplifting and organized and unorganized, or the inability to trespass people. So, no one's coming into their business anymore because it's overrun, or overrun is a strong word, but you know what I mean, because
Yeah. No, I was.
it's not getting,
Yeah.
they're unable to get police response for these so-called minor crimes. Well, when you lose a grocery store or two Walmarts or different things in your neighborhood, that has a significant impact on the neighborhood as a whole, and creates food deserts and causes people to have to travel farther. And there's a whole ripple effect
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
negative consequences because we didn't have the resources to address petty crimes. And those are the livability issues. The chances, and this isn't to at all diminish the real pain and anguish that is caused when someone is affected by a murder or violent crime and stuff. But the reality statistically is that's not where most people are going to be affected by crime, right? Most
Right.
people are going to be affected when you try to ride the max and somebody assaults you or smokes fentanyl on the max or something like that. And those are the things that cause people to think it's not a safe city and they need to leave,
Totally.
right?
Totally. Yeah.
And what do you see? What's a reminder every day about where the city is? Every time you go in your supermarket, something that you didn't used to be locked up is now locked up,
Behind
right?
glass or yeah, whatever.
And that's a constant, everyday reminder that your city isn't as safe as it used to be.
Mhm.
And and that's why we need to take that stuff really seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And I brought up because I was literally just a couple hours ago reading about St. John's.
Hmm.
K2 had a thing about St. John, a bunch of businesses that were like, we're like one break in away from having to close.
Right.
And they were all complaining about the lack of police. And that's why I'm telling people we
Right.
need more police
Well,
to
and
solve
that
this.
brings up a really good story I heard at a oh, I'm not going to remember the name of it now. East Portland Chamber of Commerce meeting. I was talking to a guy there, and he said, I'm still a member of East Portland Chamber of Commerce, but I moved my business out of East Portland into Milwaukee. And I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, it's really simple. When I come to work every morning, my business hasn't been tagged. And when I come to work every morning, I don't have a guy smoking fentanyl in my doorway. And he says, and my business is no longer broken into every other month. And I no longer have to chase people out of my parking lot who are trying to set up tents. And he says, and I pay less taxes.
There you go.
And the reality is clear, right? Nobody likes paying taxes, but what they hate even more than paying taxes is paying taxes and feeling like they're not getting anything for their money.
Right.
And you cannot have the second highest local taxes in the nation and have all the other problems, because no business is going to think this is a good place to move to, and a lot of businesses are thinking it's a good place to move out of.
Right.
And
Even if it's an adjacent county or
yeah, Milwaukee's not that far away.
Yeah,
His
yeah.
his customers now have a much better experience coming to his business than they had in Portland.
Right.
And that's going to continue to cause real long-term harm to the city of Portland.
Yeah.
And we just have to address it in ways that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned PSR because usually the way I phrase this question is, what would you change with police and PSR? And you kind of talked about the police a little bit, but I always bring up, if PSR worked how it ideally should, then hopefully they could abate some of those police problems. But right now, the thing I always point out is they can't transport people, which
Right.
seems like a huge
Well, and
thing.
it's interesting. Obviously, in the taxi industry, we get calls from
Really,
people like the police, but also from Portland Street Response,
to
and
move people.
they call a cab,
Yeah.
and we are happy to give rides when we can, but the reality is that you're taking somebody who you've acknowledged needs trained response, right?
Right.
People who understand and have training to deal with the problem they have. They're taking them to a place where in theory they're going to get trained
Mm-hmm. It could be a
equipped,
hospital
right,
or something, or
whatever.
yeah,
And then you put them in a car with someone with no training and no supervision and say, take them from here to here.
right. That's a
And
dangerous
it create
thing.
there's issues of danger, there's and it's hard to say, but let's be honest, issues of cleanliness, issues
Yeah,
of,
sanitation,
all those
and I'm
things.
not saying dangerous for both the driver and the person. Like it could just
No, and that is a real issue around transporting people, and especially people that you have come to because they are in a crisis, especially if it's a mental health crisis.
right.
But Portland Street Response and, the different programs that are police alternatives, I think have a place, but I would like, really to I think make sure that they have more that they can do. So when you say, "Oh, we're going to call Portland Street Response," and they come and they spend time with the person and they provide services, and I say provide services in air quotes because what services do they provide, right? And you hear things like, "Oh, we give them snacks and we
Right.
hand them a blanket
Hot
and like
chocolate or
hot
something.
chocolate and we talk to them," and you're like, "Okay, well, that's great, but what they do is connect them to other services,
Right.
and what that's part of that. What are they actually doing for that person beyond fulfilling a short-term need for them to have somebody to talk to, right?
Right.
Because the ultimate goal here is, we want people off the street, not just off the street, but we want them in treatment, or we want them in housing, and the whole goal is never for that to be permanent, right? The whole goal is to say, we're going to get you from where you are so that to a place where you're working at a job and you're paying your own rent on a place that we're not paying for. And so that's my biggest concern about some of these programs is what, I know what the police do when the police show up, right? I want to know more about what services you're actually providing, rather than just saying we're connecting you with services,
Yeah.
right? Because when I looked at the Portland State Review, I think it was the 18-month review, and they say, well, as 18 months of the pilot version of the program, we got 2 people into permanent housing. Well, that's a lot of money for 2
Right.
people.
Doesn't
And
seem very efficient. Yeah.
yeah, and so that's those kinds of concerns that we really, I think, in Portland, and this is why, I my sort of campaign slogan is like, we need rational outcome-based leadership, right? We need someone who's going to say, I know that you love this program and I know that you think it does good work, right? But what outcomes are we seeing? What's the goal, right? And is it achieving those outcomes in a way that's cost effective and makes sense, and wouldn't be done better by a different program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have an infinite amount of money, and we need to get the best bang for our buck all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're clearly not. We're clearly not.
Yeah, I mean, it's the number one. I wouldn't say number one. One of the top things I hear about is people feel like they're paying a lot of money and they don't see those services reflected
Well,
from the county or the city.
right. Well, and when you know that the city alone spent $62,000, and that number is obviously an average, but $62,000, or not an average, but a rounding, $1,000 per homeless person last year,
Mm-hmm.
and you say and equal or more amounts for the last decades, right?
Right.
You say to yourself, how can you spend that much money per homeless person and still have homeless people?
Right.
Right.
And actually, it's going up.
And it's going up.
Right.
And I tell people, I love this, kind of the ridiculous fact that right now, or at least 2 weeks ago when I looked, you could get a week-long cruise in the Caribbean on Princess Cruise Lines for $798 a week, right?
Yeah.
And you would get gourmet meals and, according to them, luxury destinations, exotic destinations, right? Well, if you do the math, you realize that we would save $14,000 a year per homeless person if they spent the entire year on the Love Boat.
Mm-hmm.
And that just that's a thing I can relate to about how much money we are spending and what we're getting for it.
And I also thought of,
and
go ahead.
No, and that, it's easy to get overwhelmed by numbers, but when you put it in that kind of perspective, you realize that $62,000 a year would pay my mortgage 2.5 times. So you could literally buy every one of them a house and save 50%, right? Or, the average apartment, two-bedroom apartment, sorry, the median two-bedroom apartment in Portland is less than $2,000. It's like
Probably
1,900, whatever.
1,800.
So
Yeah.
you would save over half if you simply rented every single homeless person a two-bedroom apartment. And then you say to yourself, but two could share. So you'd save three-quarters.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're spending an incredible amount of money. And so it's always interesting to me because I'll go to a forum and we need to invest in this and we need to invest in this. And I will stand up after someone has used that word and say, look, we're investing already a huge amount of money. We are spending so much money. We don't need to invest more money. What we need to do is demand outcomes,
Yeah.
right? What we need to do is hold people accountable for results. And, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, the city council created a position finally in the city that was going to be sort of the grant czar, right? One person in city government who was going to track and keep track of all the grants that all the bureaus and everybody gave out, right? And that's apparently they said something, we give $30 million worth of grants each year. And that's a great thing. It boggles my mind that that position didn't exist before,
Right.
and that nobody was sort of tracking that.
Yeah.
But it leads to the obvious, to me, conclusion that we need an equivalent position for contracts that the city has with not-for-profits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we need to be able to know. You go, how many people, organizations out there are working on this problem? How much are we paying them? What do they claim that they are doing for our money? And what actually is coming of it?
Right.
Because we have a right to know. The people of Portland have a right to know how the city can spend this much money and not fix the problem.
It's their money.
It's their money.
Yeah.
But also because how do you judge what's working and not working if there's no one entity in the city government who even knows
Right.
who all the players are?
You can't be flying blind. So
And
to
there
speak.
was a really good article from one of our, I think, former county commissioners where she said one of the huge frustrations that she had, and I wish I had her name on the top of my head, one of the huge frustrations she had dealing with the homeless crisis in Portland is she could, the entire time she was on Multnomah City Council, not get a straight answer to the question, how many beds do we currently have?
Right. Which should be a pretty basic
You would
question.
think that somebody would know the answer to that. And she said, but that's how disjointed, that's how many different people have their hands in that pie, that's how nobody is communicating with each other, so one not-for-profit doesn't really know what another profit is doing, and the people who are giving them money don't always know because it's coming from different bureaus, it's coming from different organizations. Well, that has to stop, right? We have to have a way of knowing who's doing what, who's duplicating what, and if you can't even answer the question of how many shelter beds do you have, right, definitively, then how are you going to answer the question of do we have enough shelter beds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think most people would agree we don't, but we don't know. It turns out we may not even know by how much, right?
Yeah.
So it was fascinating, but also sort of really disheartening.
It's wild too for somebody like me. I've never worked in any sort of government role, and in the corporate world, in the private world, small business world, all that, like that's all what it is trackable,
right? Absolutely.
Like ROI and all this stuff. And so to not have that, it's just such a simple.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because, one of the things that I like about my diverse background is, and I've said this quite a bit, is, look, I have experience in the real world, right? And that is where if you spend money and it doesn't work, right, you don't just apply for another grant, right? You end up getting fired, right?
Yeah, you got to change
or your
something.
business goes under, or there's real consequences, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important when we have candidates who will proudly tell you that straight out of college or straight out of law school or they went into government and then they worked for this senator and then they did this other thing and they know government. And the problem with knowing government is you often don't know the real world at all.
Right.
And when you deal, as I have at Radio Cab, with the government, you realize they have so many people have no concept of what goes on in the real world. That's really, really dangerous because they're passing laws, they're writing codes, they're doing things. And often they have very little concept of how those things that they do can affect people and businesses in ways that they don't anticipate because they have no context.
Yeah.
And that's not to disparage their good work. It's just the reality I see,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, you know, there's a candidate in my district who likes to talk about bringing City Bike to Portland, right? Because what a great idea, bicycles. And you forget or that there were a dozen or more mom and pop bicycle shops in
Mm.
Portland that made money
Mm.
renting bicycles. And the instant that City Bike was brought in, that entire business was destroyed and a bunch of those places went under, right? And that's the kind of thing that you need to think about
Right.
when you're
Right.
making, you know, agreements with large corporations like Nike to do things in your city, or when you're passing code, or when you're doing stuff is, wait a minute, who's out there? How is this going to affect them? Do we want to cause, because nothing is free,
Right.
right? Do we want to cause this kind of damage to these businesses in order to get that benefit,
Mm-hmm.
or to these group of people in order to get that benefit? And we see that with the things, like I say, PBOT's done on Division or done on Gleason against the wishes of 99% of the people who live in East Portland, right? You know, and I've talked to those business owners and they're like, nobody wanted this. They did it anyway. My businesses and all the businesses along that street have lost 30% of their business since they did it. Our property values have dropped 20%. Why would we stay here? And those are real world consequences to doing things.
Yeah.
And it's important that we take all of that into consideration. And what I see, and you've talked to a lot more people than I have probably, well, maybe not talk more, but in this in depth like this, is that I think I bring a much more holistic overall, you know, I ask those questions
Yeah.
because I've seen those effects. And when you have people who come from advocacy or that come from the nonprofit world, they're they tend to be more focused on, this is what I think we should do.
Right.
Because they seem to me to see public office as the next step of advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't think I have all the answers in the way that they think they do. What I have is like I say, a broad and a base of experience and knowledge, and that includes the law, and it includes working with City Hall on trying to change codes, and Super and Lift came in and drafting code provisions and all those sorts of things. But it's also beyond that, into small business, into, you know, working with cab drivers from a broad range of backgrounds and life choices, or not life choices, but life experiences, and every gender identity that you can imagine, every different thing, and having to work with all those people. And what it makes you realize is it's important to have vision and bring those things that I think are important, but it's as important or more important to realize, to have the humility to realize that the people that you're representing know what they need,
Mm-hmm.
know what they want from city government, and that your job, 90% of your job, is to listen to them, right? Is to advocate for what they want, not to go out there and tell them this is what you need.
This is what's best for you.
This is what's best for you. And East Portland has spent the entire time it's been in the city of Portland hearing, we know what's best for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is they don't. They haven't.
And it hasn't worked out.
And it hasn't worked out for East Portland. And so, you know, that's really one of the things that I just think is incredibly important is I'm going to come in with ideas, and I'm going to come in with, you know, some of the things we talked about what I think are important or the best ways to bring Portland back and into the future. But I've said many times, if I have a great idea, and, you know, my wife will tell you I have tons of great ideas. Anyway, if I have a great idea and I come out to the people of East Portland and I say to them, I have this great idea, this is what we should do, and they give me the giant raspberry and say, we don't want that.
Yeah.
My job as a city councilor, as a representative of East Portland, is to say, I guess we're not going to do that,
Right.
because you don't answer to me, right? I answer to you.
Yeah.
I answer to you. And that's what we haven't seen. And that's what this East Portland hasn't seen from a lot of government entities in Portland
Yeah.
for decades.
Yeah. I'm glad. I don't know. I'm I'm glad you're pointing out because it's just one of the huge concerns I have, mostly with the county too,
Hmm.
because I feel like they've dug their heels in ideologically for the past 4 years. And
Absolutely.
there's a couple good commissioners that are trying to change stuff, but they just don't have the votes. But that's exactly and I tell people all the time, candidates and stuff who come on here, like, I love the ability to change your mind because,
Right.
like you're saying, that's your job. Your
Right.
job isn't to say I have the ideological answers and I'm gonna,
Well,
you know,
and I look at a lot of the programs, and again, I have a lot of interest in transportation because of my current job, but I look at a lot of the programs and they don't work, right? We know Vision Zero hasn't worked in any single city in the United
oh
States that's
yeah.
ever adopted it. We know that since they adopted it in Portland, traffic fatalities have doubled, and
I'm
that's
I'm so glad you brought that up because
in,
I,
yeah, including during the COVID years when people were driving less,
yeah,
right? And there's a lot of people who are focused totally on, I think this is right, therefore it is right, rather than I think this was right, we tried it, it didn't work, let's try something else. But
it's kind of the definition of insanity, right?
it
To be
is,
sit there and just say this is gonna work, it's gonna work, and then every year it
right.
doesn't work. You know.
But I give people this analogy, and not everybody anymore is old enough to remember the universal 55-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Hmm.
All right. I don't know if you remember it.
Nationwide or okay.
Nationwide, because the federal government decided that if a state was going to get federal highway dollars,
Mm.
they had to limit their top speed to 55 miles an hour. And the reason for that was really clear. Every single study in existence showed that if you slow the speeds from 65 or 70 to 55, you save a bunch of lives,
Mm.
right? That was 100% true, right? 100% true. Do we have a universal 55-mile-an-hour speed limit anymore? No. And why? The people didn't want it.
Mm.
And the reality is that even if your program is a program that works, right? Again, if the people don't want it in a democracy, it
Right.
shouldn't happen.
It's kind of the whole
And
point, right?
that's kind of the whole point. And so the reality is I think a lot of people, consciously or unconsciously, think that people don't know what's good for them.
Right, right.
And so they think it doesn't matter if you want it, I know it's good for you. The reality is, even if Vision Zero worked, it doesn't. But even if it did, if people don't want it, they have the absolute right to make that choice, to
Right.
say, I understand what the compromises are here.
It's
And
it's a
this is how,
risk we're willing to
and
take.
this is a risk we're willing to take.
Yeah.
And
It's not
so
up to Peabot to
it's not
just
up to Peabot.
yeah.
It's up to the people.
Hmm.
And I just tremendously believe in that. And that doesn't mean that as a leader, I won't be out there trying to say, here's why
Hmm.
I think this is the best choice, right? Here's why I think we should go this direction. But if I can't convince the people of District 1, it's not my job to do it anyway,
Right, right.
right? And I fundamentally think that that's an incredibly important part of what the job of a city councilor should be and what it is elected official should be. And when
Yeah, yeah.
I look at the 122nd Street plan, and they have some of their questionnaire answers in there, and the number one questionnaire answer is absolutely positively do not create congestion.
Mm.
And the entire 122nd Street plan brags about how they're going to slow down traffic.
Mm.
I think to myself, you don't care. You're not listening. You're going to do what you want to do, regardless of what the people of East Portland want. And that's not your job.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so, anyway,
No, that's a great point because I had on here. What did I have it on here? I've just been hearing a lot this week about. I'm sure you have too. About there's. I mean, I'm not even going to get into the geopolitics of it, but there's a whole new like Israel Gaza. What's the word there? Pledge that a lot
yeah,
of these candidates are signing, and that just totally, to me, aligns with what you're saying. Of like, they're so focused on stuff that the people here, local issues do not,
uh,
affect that. Like,
you know, and,
and I think there's a lot of candidates who just have this ideology in their mind, and they're like, "This is what I'm gonna do," you know.
well, and let me give you my overarching response to requests that I pledge something
Pledge,
before an
yeah, yeah.
election. And there was a wiser man than I who said the number one reason to not sign a pledge is the fact that it was offered to you. And what I took from that was, and it made perfect sense to me, what I took from it was, if you have a program, right, and I am running for an elected office, right? I'm not going to know the ins and outs of every single program. And if you tell me pledge to support this program, what I immediately think is you're worried that when I get into office, I will learn enough about that program to not want to support it, but now you've got my pledge. You don't need to give me a pledge, right? I'm focused on outcomes. If your program is a good program that achieves the results that the promises to achieve, and it's a program that we need in the city of Portland, you don't have to worry about me signing a pledge. I will support it, right? Because that's what our goal is, right? But this idea that you should pledge in advance to support a program, I just have a real problem with it. I will watch that program. I will see if it's doing what we want it to, what it's supposed to do, what we want it to do. I will look at it in comparison to the hundreds of other programs that we have in a budget that's shrinking and do a triage to make sure the stuff that's most important gets funded. And I'd like to think I will be brutal about, is it achieving the results? And just because it's achieving the results today doesn't mean it will achieve it 2 months from now or 2 years from now or 10 years from now. So to me, it's a constant ongoing progress of getting the most for our money and being as efficient as possible and being focused on results. You want your program funded, you want it supported, then show me it works.
Yeah. I've been calling him recently. I just think, preemptively signing these things for people that aren't even in office is performative. And it's just,
well, and
and like you said, I think you're taking the more hard, complex route of like trying to understand the issue.
Well, and I understand the difficulties of politicians more now than ever, but I don't want to be a person that someone will come back to me and say, but Noah, you signed this pledge, right? Or you promised this. Like, no, what I promised to you is that I'm going to listen to you, that I'm going to do the things that are important for Portland, that I think are important, that you think are important, but I'm going to defer to you, that here's the things that I think are important. So if you support me, you should put me in office. And we're going to try to make this city better, and we're going to try to meet the needs of the people. And again, there's very few programs where I will sit here and say, draw a line in the sand and say, we're not doing anything to that. I'm supporting that forever. And those things tend to be the very basics that you think of why people built cities, right? If I said to you as a 5-year-old, why do we have a city? You would say, well, we have to have a fire department and we have to have a police department and somebody needs to maintain the streets, right? Really basic, fundamental stuff, right? Basic stuff. And I think that we have to prioritize that. If we're not doing the basics well, then we really have to ask ourselves why we're doing all the extras, right? We really need to do what the basics, and then look at, do we have extra money to do extra things?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Because there's so many programs that are not laser focused on the basic livability stuff that I would like to see.
Well, and the reality is that there is so much that would be wonderful to do if we have an infinite amount of money, and we don't.
Yeah, and once we tackle those basic things, maybe we can start thinking about that. But
well, and public safety is one of those things where it's so fundamental because almost nothing else works if people aren't safe.
That's a broken kind of
because if you don't feel safe going to a park, then planning events in the park isn't going to do any good. If you don't feel safe getting on the max, then trying to force people out of their cars onto public transportation is never going to work. I don't believe it's going to work anyway, but it will never work, right? Those are really, if you don't feel safe parking your car in downtown, then you're never going to go downtown and will never revitalize downtown, right? So it's that kind of level of fundamental basic stuff that often is the underlying thing that makes everything else possible.
Yeah. And I know you keep mentioning TriMet or just public transit, but I saw that thing this week about TriMet. It was like 86% of people say they're worried about other people on transit.
Absolutely. And because people sometimes go from one professional driver type job to another professional driver type job, I know people who've moved from radio cab on to TriMet, and they tell me horror stories, and they tell me stories of how often they've had to stop a bus and let everybody off and air it out for 15 minutes because somebody was smoking fentanyl on it. Right. And the problem is it doesn't matter how often that happens. It only has to happen to you once before you're pretty well done writing TriMet,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And and there's that's so true of a lot of things is that your last experience is going to be the one that dictates what happens next for a long time.
yeah. It
And
resonates.
yeah,
Yeah. I just have a couple more kind of
no.
serious ones before I always end with a bunch of goofy questions.
Oh, no. Knock yourself out.
Um, I think I know the answer to this, but do you have a mayoral pick you're going with?
Well, I've been endorsed by Rene Gonzalez, and I'm absolutely supporting him for mayor. For a couple of reasons. I mean, I think we have a lot of policy similarities, especially around fire and law enforcement and trying to support and attract business to Portland. But one of the other things, and this is one of those things that makes him a controversial person, but I think is important, is that he has been willing to do things that he thinks are right and are what the people of Portland want, even when it really made certain segments of the advocacy community or other parts of Portland really angry.
Mm.
And I think that's important, right? I think it's important that you have people who are willing to do very difficult things because they're seeing that what is going on isn't the best thing for Portland. And
Yeah.
so, um, and you see, I think a lot of people who are either unwilling to do that or they're really what they're doing is very much staying with the I think the expectations of what I would call the advocacy community or that particular demographic of Portland,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think there's a lot of, especially in East Portland, there's a lot of people who haven't been represented by that demographic or
Yeah,
haven't
yeah.
been represented by that community. And so,
For a lot of the
but
reasons we've talked
a
about.
lot of
Yeah.
reasons we've talked about,
Yeah.
and it's we need people who are going to say, okay, but what does everybody and what does the majority of people in Portland,
Yes.
what are
Yeah.
the other voices in Portland, how can we represent them and what do they want, and recognize that may make that particular community unhappy and
Yeah.
still be willing to do it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would say those are characteristics of a leader,
Right.
and yeah, I agree with you of that. Like, I think we've had many years here in Portland of decisions being made that cater to a very small, vocal, loud segment
Well,
of,
and
of the
my
population.
favorite example of that is that there is a bicycle committee, right, that advises PBOT on literally every transportation plan that they introduce, right?
Oh, really? Wow.
And bicyclists as commuters make up less than 5% of the commuters.
Yeah, but they're affecting
85,
all
80
the.
plus percent of the commuters on a daily basis are in cars,
Mhm.
yet they have no input at all in any way on a committee level or anything else in transportation policy that's being adopted by PBOT. And so it's that kind of thing where you have to say, wait a minute,
Why do they have it?
the rest of us here are also important.
Yeah,
And I understand the argument that says, hey, for generations, the only thing that mattered to anybody was how fast can you move cars through a community, right? And they said that didn't take into consideration other voices. I get that. But the answer to that is not, therefore, we will only give the other voices a listen and we will no longer talk to anybody who drives.
yeah. There's a balance.
There's a balance
Yeah.
because, one, everybody in the city deserves to be treated with respect by the city, but also because our transportation infrastructure has to work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. And if 80% of people are driving, I guarantee you it's not because they're all jerks. It's because driving is the fastest, most efficient, most cost-effective way for them to do the things they need to do on a daily basis. The city of Portland should not be punishing them for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we need to invest in bicycle infrastructure. We need to continue to invest in public transportation infrastructure, but we can't pretend it already exists when it doesn't. Right? There is no max that runs to deep southeast. There is no north-south max on the east side. We don't have the subway system that New York has or London has or Paris has or whatever.
Yeah.
We can't pretend that we do and think we're going to force people out of their cars onto a system that doesn't work for them.
And it's a great point because I talk about this all the time on here about how, in my opinion, and I think it's just true that, in communities like mine and probably in East Portland, there's I think Portland forgets there's a lot of low and middle income people who just have to drive and that's their main thing and they don't have this infrastructure that
Well,
you're talking about.
and we could go on a deep dive into the history of Portland and how it was built and how it expanded the way it expanded and the way development was done. But the short and sweet important message from that would be East Portland was built fundamentally differently than the rest of Portland,
Yeah.
intentionally. And it was built with bigger lots, and it was built with greater distances, and it was built outside of, it was unincorporated county up until, 40 years ago. And and it was designed around cars. And you can say, well, Noah, but designing a city around cars is a terrible, terrible idea. And even if I agree with you, it doesn't change the fact that we did it.
Right.
And that we have to acknowledge that in a place that was built around cars, where you haven't invested in the infrastructure of public transportation like you have in other parts of Portland, and where you haven't invested in, a whole bunch of things, right? There's not, as the supermarkets are further apart, the schools are further apart, people have to go further. Then you have to recognize that people need to drive. They don't always want to drive, but they need to, right? And we have to make sure that the city is working to make that as efficient and easy for people as it possibly can be, while at the same time saying, and let's develop our infrastructure for bicycles, and let's develop our infrastructure for walkability, and let's develop our infrastructure for public transportation. Because if you develop those things, you won't have to force more people out of their cars, because once you get there, they will be able to, they will want to, it will be convenient. But we like to put the cart before the horse in Portland, right? And we like to do that in Oregon sometimes. And what I mean is that we like to punish people for doing something we don't want them to do before we have an infrastructure to allow them not to, right? That's transportation policy. And then we look at decriminalization, and what made decriminalization work in Portugal or other parts of Europe. I don't know. They have universal health care,
Right.
for one,
They have
right?
systems to
They have systems
absorb all those
already.
people,
They
yeah.
have treatment facilities already. They have resources devoted to helping people already. Well, if you do decriminalization before you do all those other things, it's never going to work. Now, there is some discussion in Portugal about whether it's working, but just fundamentally, you have to do the underlying things that make it possible first.
Yeah.
And we don't want to do that. We don't want to wait. But it won't work unless you do.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue to my last thing. I was just going to ask about the Joint Office of Homeless Services and how you. I know there's people always kind of frame it as for candidates of like, would you, have this conditional relationship with them and keep things going, or just sever it, or just say, oh, it's all fine and good. You guys are doing great.
Well, clearly it's not all. Well, let me rephrase. It doesn't matter if the relationship is fine and good. It's clearly not working.
It's not doing
it's
much,
not
yeah.
doing what it's supposed to do. I think it's important to maintain every relationship, right? Because even if we created Noah's hypothetical czar for not-for-profits so that we knew all the not-for-profits that were being contracted with by the city, unless we're communicating and working with Multnomah County, we're not going to know all of that information about what
Right.
Multnomah County is doing. And really, coordination is more efficient than two different organizations overlapping each other doing the same thing and not talking,
Just more
right?
siloing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think you mentioned conditioning, and I was speaking to one of the other candidates who worked on that relationship between Multnomah County and the city around homeless services, and he said we tried to put a condition on money going from the city to the county that said you have to commit that as a result of all this, you'll have reduced the homeless population by at least one homeless
One
person.
person, yeah.
Right. And the county wouldn't even commit to that.
Wow, yeah.
And so, if that's true, that's a broken system, right? Because I don't know about you, but if I said to you, what is the goal here, right? You would say the goal is to end homelessness, right? That's the overreaching goal. We don't want our friends and neighbors or anybody else living on the street. We want people to get into shelter, and then we want them to get into services, and then we want them to get a job, and then we want them to be functioning members of society who pay rent on an apartment in the market, and then we want to shut down the whole thing that got them there because we don't need it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't even commit, despite the fact that you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year, to reducing by one person, then what are you doing? Because you are not,
Yeah.
you're not doing what we all want.
Yeah.
And so I hear people talk about, okay, well, this program is really successful because it does X, Y, and Z. And you're like, but that's great, right? But that's not ultimately what the overall goal that we want is,
Yeah.
right? Right. So the
It's almost
overall
a distraction to,
well,
yeah.
but it's what we want. You know, I say to you, I want you to reduce homelessness on the streets, and you come back to me and say, I did all these wonderful
say-
things. And my question is, but did you reduce homelessness?
Right,
And you say, no, but look at all these wonderful
Well,
things I did.
I could say, hey, I fed all these people,
Right,
whatever,
or whatever.
and you still say, well, did you
But,
solve
but
it?
yeah, but how are we getting closer to what is our goal,
Mhm.
right? And I think if you can't commit to programs actually doing something towards that goal, then again, what are you doing?
Mhm.
What are you doing? And you know, I think you know, it's been mentioned before, but you know, and this is where you start to sound callous, but I'm not callous. I'm just, let's look at realistic. We're spending a huge amount of money on homelessness, right? Huge.
It is, yeah.
It's a huge amount. They make up less than 0.5% of our population. And there is a reasonable anger, I think, amongst people who pay taxes saying, why is so much of the resources we generate being used and absorbed by such a small percentage of our population? And that's a valid question, because we're all, you know, equally important. We all
Mhm.
deserve, you know, to be for our city to be working for us and
Yeah,
working to
yeah.
make our lives better and working to make the city better. And people are very frustrated with all of this money going and being told that what we're doing is trying to solve this problem,
Yeah, yeah.
and the problem never getting better.
And that's the key, and I
Yeah.
think people would be happy to pay if they saw that reflected.
Right.
But we haven't seen
But
that. So.
when you learn that we have the second highest local taxes in Multnomah County / Portland, only to New York City,
Mhm.
I think it's a reasonable question to say, then why aren't we getting
Yeah.
the second best benefits from our city in the nation?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why? And, you know, why are other cities doing better? And there are legitimate reasons, you know, that may be out of our control why certain cities are doing better, right? You're not going to have the same homeless population during the winter in Fargo, North Dakota
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
have in Portland, for obvious reasons we
Right.
can't control. But there are things we can control, and there are things that we can do. And, you know, I think it's legitimate and important for the city council and for the mayor and for leaders of different bureaus to have an answer to that question. Like, what are you getting for your money?
Yeah.
And the reality is that homelessness and unsanctioned camping and all those different things, you hear a lot of candidates talking about how they affect the particular homeless person, and that's why we have to do all the things that we do. And they forget that those things also affect everybody else. They
Right,
affect our neighborhoods, they affect the safety of our parks, they affect transportation, they affect everything. And so I was at a forum, and some candidate pounded on the table and talked about the evil of sweeps and how it has no benefit and how, you know, destabilizing it is. And I stood up and I said, you know, I understand what you're saying with respect to those particular homeless people who end up getting moved.
Mhm.
I said, but it only has no benefit if you don't think anybody else in the city of Portland matters.
You're just ignoring the whole
Because
community.
the reality
around it.
is,
Yeah.
if you go to a neighborhood that had an unsanctioned camp in it, right, and they're picking up, you know, you if you don't have diabetes, you shouldn't have to have a Sharps box in your house, right? I mean, or you're stepping over human waste, or your car is being broken into, or your catalytic
Yeah.
converter got stolen, or all the
There's
other
a long
garbage
list. Yeah,
everywhere, all the
I
other
talk a lot about the environmental
right,
damn, yeah. Yeah.
all the other ancillary problems
Hmm.
related to having a homeless camp in your neighborhood. And then that camp leaves because they come out and they move it. Everybody in that neighborhood is practically jumping for joy, right? Because it does work. People want clean neighborhoods. They want safe neighborhoods. They want livable neighborhoods. They want to take their kids to the park without stepping over needles. They want all that stuff. And so we have to recognize and we have to acknowledge that all the people in Portland are important, and that
Yeah.
that there are real ramifications to allowing a very small segment of our population to essentially overrun the city or
Yeah, yeah.
overwhelm the city. And that sounds like a really negative way to say it, but simply I'm trying
No,
to
it's
simply describe that sense of you can't camping everywhere you want,
mhm.
doing whatever you want, leaving garbage wherever all those things, right, are really, really destroying the livability of Portland. And we
Yeah.
have to acknowledge that those people in those neighborhoods matter who live there,
Mhm.
the people who bought houses, expecting and hoping to build generational wealth and grow and all that stuff, that all matters to them.
Yeah.
And they should matter to the city as well.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking it's a theme. It's a definitely a theme with you of like hearing all the voices, not
Yeah.
just one select slice of the city. And also, it's just funny because I tell people this all the time at meetups and events and stuff. Of it's a lose lose. Unsanctioned camping is a lose lose situation
Hmm.
for the people in the tents. It's a lose situation because they're not in shelter, which could be better, and there's abuse and there's all this other stuff happening, and it's a lose for the people in homes that have to deal with all the stuff we
Right.
just talked about. So
Right. But it's and it's this where sometimes people accuse me of being far more conservative than I perceive myself to be. But let's be honest, the people in the homes are the ones paying the taxes. The people in the homes are the ones who are paying for everything.
mhm.
And to a degree, that should entitle you to at least some respect and some
Yeah,
acknowledgement,
and a
right?
voice like
And a voice.
yeah,
And I haven't met a single person who doesn't have compassion, although I think a lot of people are very far into compassion fatigue at this point,
right,
right?
right,
But people want to help people who want help. People want to provide services that work, right? Nobody wants to spend a whole bunch of money to create full employment for housing advocates and still see people on the street
right.
everywhere. Nobody wants that, right? Nobody You get asked that question as an accusation of, well, do you support locking people up who won't move, right? I mean, it's not a real question. It's to accuse you of being
Mhm,
horrible.
mhm.
The reality though is that if we have a place for you to go, right, where we can provide, even if it's a sanctioned camping area, at least we can provide sanitation, at least we can provide
Yeah,
clean water, at least we can
it's a step up from
right,
yeah,
easier access to services, all those different things, right? I believe, yes, the city should say you should offer a carrot, but there has to be a stick,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the rest of the people in the community matter, right? The livability of their lives matters, right? And it's just it's unconscionable to leave people on the street, right, and living in those conditions and pretending that when you say, well, we can't force them anywhere else, is a positive thing for them.
you
They're living in squalor,
and you're letting them
right?
languish
And you're
until
letting them
they
languish
die
and
a
they
lot of
die
yeah,
in
yeah,
tents and all that stuff. That's not compassion.
mhm,
But sometimes, like I say, we're a society,
mhm,
right? And I will tell you, whether it's coming from getting parking tickets to anything else, people are fed up with feeling that there is a group of people in our society now where none of the rules apply anymore.
yeah,
People are really frustrated when they get a ticket and the car behind them that's been there parked illegally for 2 months with no license plate doesn't,
right, right,
right? Or they get a tow notice on their car, and the camper that they've been trying to get somebody to move for 3 weeks
mhm,
doesn't. And we have, the one of the basic fundamentals of democracy, and we've heard a lot about it at the federal level, is the rule of law, right? Which is the law applies equally to
Mm-hmm.
everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of people who, well, I hear a lot of people talking about not using that phrase, right, but talking about that sense of it's time for the law to apply equally to everybody again,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah,
In
I
my
mean,
mind, it's hard to
yeah,
argue
yeah,
with
no,
that.
I mean, it's just a society level thing,
It really is,
and
and
if you go too far with that, I think you get a lot of problems like you see in Portland.
right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, okay, is there anything else you want to bring up before I get into these goofy things, or otherwise, I was going to also point people to your website or wherever
Oh
people
yeah,
should go.
so yeah,
Yeah.
my website is Noah Ernst, the number 4, Portland, noahernstforportland.com, and I'm Noah Ernst for Portland on the Instagram and Facebook and different
All the
things. So you'll
socials.
find me there. And if you have any questions, like send it to info at Noah Ernst for Portland, and I'd be myself or somebody from my team, and I have a really small team, so myself is often the answer. We'll try to get back to you. Um, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Obviously, if you want to support, we love support.
Yeah.
Donate,
Donate
ask
and
for
volunteers and all.
volunteer,
Yeah.
ask for a sign in your yard. Obviously, all those campaign things that we're doing, and and I really want to thank. Honestly, I'm constantly humbled by the amount of support that I've gotten, the people that have donated already, the fact that we got to 250, and I think
Okay.
it's worth,
I was about to ask. I was
yeah,
like, yeah,
and I
you got
think
it.
it's mentioning where you said, well, I heard your name, and it's worth mentioning that I'm not a political actor,
Mm-hmm.
right? I came into this and people said out of nowhere, right? But I've gotten a tremendous amount of support, and I just feel, I feel great about that, and it's despite not being a political actor in Portland, and despite not being connected to communities that are used to giving
Right.
money and all those things, because I hope it's because people understand that I will listen to them, I will work with them, I will advocate for them, and that together we can make this city as great as it was, better than it was. We can make it the city that Portland should be,
Mm-hmm.
and we can make it the city that we want it to be for the next generation of Portlanders.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is like it does seem like a true grassroots level thing because like when I was opened the show, I was talking about when I first saw you speak, and
Hmm.
I was just like seeing you, I was like, I don't know about this guy, but like when I first heard your speech, I was just like, okay, like this guy knows what he's.
Well,
You're very like clear eyed and centered about what you're
well,
trying to accomplish, and
yeah, I really appreciate that. The thing that I get sometimes when I knock on doors is someone will say, "Wow, you seem like you have common sense," and I'm not going to own that. I'm glad people think that. I
yeah,
try to have common sense, but it is telling, right, that when you knock on somebody's door in a city like Portland and they think you have common sense as someone who's running for office, they're shocked.
right.
Like,
You're the outlier. Yeah,
you're the outlier, and I think that's a sad sort of testament to where some of our political leadership has gone in the
yeah,
last 10 or 15 years, and I think it's also a call to action about where we need to go.
yeah. It's a low bar. But hopefully, yeah. I'm just saying, if you're in District One, yeah, I already told you this is my dream team. Vote for Noah, vote for Terrence, vote for Loretta. I
Oh
think those
well,
are all
I
great. Yeah.
really appreciate that.
I mean, I know you can only vote for one technically, but
No, that's one, two,
rank
three,
them.
one,
Yeah.
two, three with Noah number 1.
There you go. There you go. All right, I'm gonna go through these goofy questions real
Go for
quick.
it. Yeah.
And this first one, I always ask, good for you because you're or have been a driver. You've driven a lot. I always ask people if you're pulling into like a shopping center thing with just painted line parking spot. Do you pull in or do you back into that parking spot?
It depends on the vehicle.
Okay.
All right. So I drive, a lot of times I drive my Crown Vic,
Oh,
because that was my superintendent car as a cab
is that a lot
superintendent.
of radio cab? They still got
No,
those?
the Crown Vics have aged out,
Okay.
unfortunately, but some of us still think of them fondly. Um, and in some parking places, it's much better to back in because it's a very long car and
Mm-hmm.
getting out is very difficult. My other car, I call my lawyer mobile, is a 2002 little Mercedes hatchback,
Oh,
which
nice.
they call a sport coupe because Mercedes didn't want to admit that they made a hatchback. That car is very short, it's very maneuverable, and I can't remember the last time I backed it into a parking space.
Okay. That's funny. You sound like me. Like I'm not like a mechanically a car guy, but I just
Yeah.
like cars and I like learning about
Oh
them and
yeah,
stuff.
no,
Yeah.
it's fun. Some of the, I mean, and I'm going to laugh at myself here because that sounds like such a lawyer answer, right? Because the joke about lawyers is that the answer to every single question is the same. It depends.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to remember my other ones. I have some written down here. Do you have a favorite type of French fry? Do you like regular cut, crinkle cut, curly fries, waffle fries? Maybe you don't have to like them if you don't like
You know, I do like almost all French fries.
them. Okay.
I like the crispy ones. I had there. I'm gonna. We were I wish I knew where this place was. Anyway, when I was in college, was driving from Ellensburg, which is where Central is, back to Tacoma, my friend's house, and we took some weird back route. And we stopped at this mom and pop burger place, which had literally the best hamburger I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
And they had the crinkle cut fries, but deep fried. That
That
crispiness that
sounds
you get from
good.
those
Yeah.
was really, really good. But it's also the whole context of it, because the crinkle fries are what you used to get and bake in the oven, and so there's this whole
Hmm.
feeling of hominess and all
Kind of a
that kind of stuff. So
nostalgia.
I'm gonna go with those just for that memory of
Okay.
that place. I hope it still exists, and I hope people are stopping there and having the what I thought at the time was probably the best hamburger ever.
Okay. I think I might have asked you this at the event the other week, but do you like crunchy or smooth peanut butter? Maybe you don't like peanut butter.
Well, that's what you did ask me the event, remember, because this is one of my great political flip flops. As a child, I was very, very much
That's right. I
very,
remember.
very much a crunchy peanut butter guy, and now I'm very much smooth.
Okay.
So
I'm kind of the
if you're a peanut butter,
inverted of that.
oh yeah, if you're a peanut butter voter, then
You got both.
you're well, or you've got neither, because no one likes someone who flip flops.
Okay. Um, let's see. If you're getting ice cream somewhere, do you go waffle cone, regular cone, cup?
Waffle cone.
Okay, the tastiest option. And what?
Well, also, and
I'm not.
the largest
I'm not
option.
saying
The
that.
largest option.
What flavor are you putting in there? Is there a certain flavor you like?
Well, there's so many gourmet flavors of different ice creams at different places now times, but I love most of like the cheesecake flavor. Like, so
Ooh, I
like
like that.
a lot of them will have like a strawberry cheesecake ice cream. I love that. Often I will get 2 scoops, and then I will do very contrasting things. So like, a strawberry cheesecakey thing, and then a chocolate
A little
on the,
mix. Yeah,
so it's very different.
I like
I,
that.
I like those
High
combinations.
contrast.
High
Yeah.
contrast.
I
Yeah.
like that. Okay, these are some of the newer ones I've been
Okay.
asking, and this one's been getting some heat, so
Uh-oh.
you don't have to like. But do you have do you have a favorite Taco Bell item? I was asking this.
No, you asked
Yeah.
this one at the other one, and I love it because it's one of my favorite jokes. I do have, what I love about Taco Bell is that they decided that not only am I a person, I'm a party, right?
Right.
Because the Noah meal at Taco Bell is called the party pack.
Yeah, so you just get
And
that.
so I just
Yeah.
get that.
Okay. That's
And,
great. That's great.
and
Yeah.
so it's actually, I feel so, I mean, God bless Taco Bell for recognizing that I am a party. And it's so much less insulting than Pizza Hut that thinks I'm a family of 4.
Okay. That's great. No, I'm just glad you like it. Some people come in here and they're just like, "What are you talking?" And at that event we were saying, I've had a couple people like, "It's not authentic." I'm like, "I know it's it's
So
it's
this
fast
is
food, it's
okay.
trash food, but
So
I love it."
right, and there are really great articles about whether or not any cuisine is actually authentic, and the vast majority of cuisines that we think of national
Because it's
cuisines
all been
were invented in the
Yeah.
the first recipes
hundreds of years ago.
100 years ago, and half of what we think of as Italian food was invented in Brooklyn, right? So I get what they're saying, but at the same time, dude, if it tastes good,
Yeah.
love it, and I'm one of those people that there are lots of cuisines where I love the real, authentic, gourmet, wonderful version of it. And I love the crap American version of it
Yeah.
too. And I don't think that has to be mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
And so Mexican is one of my favorites of those, because we grew up going to the Ixtapas of the world, right? Where it's big plate Mexican with
Right.
refried beans and cheese on everything,
That
and right,
hot
all that.
plate, yeah.
Oh yeah, I love it. And really good, really, authentic Mexican is also wonderful. And I don't think you have to decide.
They can both be good.
They
Yeah.
can both be good.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite fair ride or like Disneyland ride or something like that?
Um,
Some people have been
I'm not a
saying
ride.
Oaks Park.
I know. I'm not a ride person, and one of the reasons for that is it's the same reason I don't like horror movie or scary movies.
Mm.
Well, especially the really violent ones. But you know that adrenaline-y pit in the stomach feeling that the
Yeah.
whole ride is designed to get from you.
I get it from the like extreme thrill rides of yeah.
I don't care for it.
Okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
not a real ride guy. You know, I love going on the go-karts. If that's a ride,
I would say that counts. Yeah.
that's fun to me. If you have one that's got really good vintage bumper cars, those are always fun.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have one that is still using pellet guns for their fire rifle ranges, which of
Oh
course
yeah, yeah.
99% of them have gone away
You're talking
from
about the old
because
like clown
oh yeah, where you're
games or whatever.
knocking over the ducks that are
Yeah, the
coming.
ducks.
Those
Yeah.
are great things. But yeah, I'm not a roller coaster
I
guy.
think
I'm not a spin around, fly upside. I just it's
right.
not me.
I think those all count though. Some
Okay.
people even brought up the roller skating rink, which was
Well, the roller I wouldn't call that a ride, but the Oaks Park roller skating rink is an
it's
amazing
cool. Yeah.
amazing thing, and OPB did a really good documentary series about what they called trolley parks, which of course
Mm.
Oak Park was, right? It was built by a trolley company to be at the end of their line,
Yeah, because
to
you can see the
give people a
track and
place to go on the
yeah.
weekends and use their trolleys. And there's a bunch of those around the country,
Mm.
most of which don't survive anymore. And a lot of them put in things like the roller rinks, and very few of the roller rinks still are in
I
use and
believe it. Yeah.
exist and are in the kind of wonderful condition that Oaks Parks
Yeah.
is in.
I believe it. I think the town I grew up in, they're all closed down.
Oh
I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of that's happened. So we have that's a gem of Portland for
Yeah.
sure.
And I like the little bump thing they have, the little bumps they have here. All right, this is the last one I've been asking people, and
Okay.
it might be the goofiest, but
Okay.
it's been going well. So
All right. Lay it on me.
I've been asking people
Lay it on
for
me.
their nut rankings, and here's mine. Here's mine. I got pistachio.
And keep it clean.
Yeah, pistachio, peanut, cashew. Those are my top three. Almond is number 4. But I also
No.
someone also was like, hey, maybe if someone's allergic to nuts, so but obviously like peanut butter. So
Um. Yeah. We have to be inclusive of absolutely everybody in every question. I'm gonna go with peanut number one.
okay, I like that. It's a flexible one. You can.
It is the only one I like in desserts,
Mm,
bar none.
mm,
I think I might go pistachio second. That's just something you can just shuffle
snack.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great one. I might go almonds third. Also as a snacking thing, and the almonds are a great vehicle for all the spicy, all the
Right,
different
smoky or whatever.
whatever,
Yeah.
flavors that they put on it. Um,
I like
I
that.
like walnuts. I like walnuts. I like, and they half the fun is getting them that aren't shelled, so that you can use a nutcracker and do
Get
all
in
that
there,
kind of
yeah.
stuff. But yeah, I think that's the order I would go. If I'm not a fan of like I say, cookies or desserts or anything that have nuts in them, with the possible, like I say, with the exception um, of peanuts,
It's
and
funny.
possibly the exception of really good baklava.
Okay, yeah, yeah. No, it's funny you bring that because a lot of people rank pecans really high just because of like pecan pie, and I'm like, I don't. That's like the only reason you like them. Like I don't get it, but
Yeah,
I
how
don't
do you?
even really
Well,
like that pie.
and there's many things, right, that I wouldn't rank highly that may have one particular thing that's really good about them. But what I like is not them. I like
The
that
actual
one
thing,
thing.
yeah.
So, like zucchini is a perfect example. It has no reason to exist, in my opinion, at all for anything. But zucchini bread is good,
I see what you
right?
mean. Yeah,
You see
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
But if it's not in zucchini bread form, don't bring it near me, right?
Okay.
And so I would never say, "Oh yeah, I like zucchini," right? And
Yeah.
if all you like is pecan pie, then what you like is pecan pie. You don't like pecans, right?
Yeah.
You know, I love pumpkin pie, or more importantly, pumpkin cheesecake at Thanksgiving, right? Do I like pumpkin?
Yeah, that's
Like,
maybe the best example of that
right?
because like,
Like,
what are you gonna do? Eat the seeds?
yeah,
Like,
no, I mean, you can do lots of things with pumpkins in the fall, and there's tons of recipes for pumpkin soup and stuff, but I would never describe myself as,
It's
yes, I like
it's more
pumpkin.
of an ingredient.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
All right. I like it. Well, you made it through the gauntlet.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming today.
No,
And
absolutely. Thanks for having me,
yeah.
and, what a pleasure. hopefully we had a good discussion. Hopefully people have learned more about me and why they should mark me number one on their ranked choice ballot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, vote for Noah. And yeah, thanks for coming today. Yeah.
Thank you.